good afternoon, good morning, something like that. Dr. John Belkowitz here. We're doing our Q&A session for the week. We'll be doing this every Wednesday. We'll post something on Monday and see if we can get questions between Monday and Wednesday, but these are questions that we get off of our LinkedIn, our Facebook, or Instagram. The first question, I can't remember who it was from, and in the future what we'll do is we'll take a screenshot of these questions and post them on these videos. First question was, how does colloidal silica help mitigate alkali silica reactivity in concrete? And this was a huge focus of my PhD, and it is published. We have all the information posted publicly and for free. And the way that that colloidal silica or nanosilica particles in a beautiful dispersion helps out with ASR is threefold. The first way is it goes through something called accelerated cement dissolution. There's a wonderful set of papers written by this gentleman, I believe his name is Bjorn Bjornström, back in 2003 and 2004, that talks about how the size of the nanosilica particle and the fact that it has a very small electrical double layer forces a higher degree of cement dissolution, or the dissolving of one cement particle, because of the reaction rate that we get from this high amount of reactivity from our nanosilica particle, this pozzolanic reaction, as well as the small size of the particle. And that's the second piece of it, this heterogeneous nucleation, where things that are really, really small will have really, really small force fields, and other things will want to grow on those things. There's a great paper written by a guy named Land et al. Back in 2012, where he talks about this heterogeneous nucleation. He calls it a calcium silicate hydrate seeding effect. And if the particle of the nanosilica is small enough, once it gets into this hydrating cement matrix, it might instantaneously turn into this calcium silicate hydrate localized zone, or this calcium silicate hydrate seed from that nanosilica particle. And the third thing is pozzolanic reaction. We are still working with silica, and that silica, like we've already said a number of times, or I've already said a number of times, is a very reactive particle because of the size of it and because of that electrical double layer. So because of all that, we are going to see that pozzolanic reaction, but we're going to see it happening faster. And this goes back into Land's paper, into a lot of my work, that we see not only a higher degree of cementitious hydration, but we see a lower amount of calcium hydroxide or lime or portlandite in our mix, and that kind of steers back towards this pozzolanic reaction where we're consuming that calcium hydroxide with that silica to create more of that backbone of concrete strength, that calcium silicate hydrate. Okay, so based off of all that, what we're doing is stopping, or I should say stopping, but slowing down the migration of alkalis, using up a lot of that pore water, and then densifying the hydrated cement matrix around the aggregate. What this all does is create an environment that is less conducive to that chemical attack. We've got more of a void-filling particle-to-particle packing, denser, lower permeability, lower percolation, so it's harder for things to move towards that aggregate that would attack the aggregate, like the soluble alkalis, the pore water, because we've densified the entire hydrated cement matrix as well as densifying around that aggregate itself. Okay, so this is a question that was asked to me by Gary Vaynerchuk in person. So that was pretty freaking cool. Didn't tape it or anything like that. That was when we went to go see him over at
National Achievers Conference.
Right, at the Denver Coliseum. Mm-hmm. So he asked me, can we stop concrete from cracking? And the answer is, yeah, kind of. A lot of chemicals out there, shrinkage reducing admixtures. There are certain types of sugars that they work on a few different principles, and what they're basically doing is slowing down the hydration mechanism and playing with the pore water tension of the fluid that's within the concrete. And what we're trying to do is, when concrete cures, there's a lot of pores that have water in it. All right? So you have a pore right here, and there's water in it. And what happens is those pores tend to lose water through evaporation. And what we see, because that happens, there's a certain closing pressure where the evaporating water wants to actually pull the walls of that pore closer together. Now the equation for that is the capillary pressure equals 2 gamma cosine theta over R. Now, you don't need to understand most of that equation except for the fact that we can only control really one or two things in that equation. The gamma, which is the surface tension of that water, which some of these chemicals are attacking, they're reducing the surface tension, so reducing the mechanism that actually, not the mechanism, but the chemicals that go behind closing that. The other thing that we can't really control is the radius, and bear in mind that radius is in the denominator. So as we go deeper into that pore through evaporation, that capillary pressure becomes excessively high. Now the funny thing is that normally happens at the same time that the concrete's hardening. And the fact remains is concrete is not great in tension or shear. It doesn't have a lot of tensile strength or shear capacity to it. So when this pore, this capillary pressure is trying to overcome the strength of the hardening concrete or cement, it eventually ends up cracking that surface to release that capillary pressure, that energy that's built up from that capillary pressure. So that's one of the older school chemicals out there. Another way of getting past this cracking is by using expansive materials, type K cements, hydrated or calcined lime, I should say, magnesium sulfol aluminates. There's a lot of bells and whistles out there that can be added to the concrete that will actually give you some initial expansion that'll overcome some of that shrinkage, but you're not really changing that shrinkage. You're just expanding a little bit and you're still going through the same shrinkage mechanism. So the difference that you've caused, now you have a lower shrinkage value even though you've gone through the same mechanism. So that's one way. And then there are fibers, both macro, micro, and nanofibers that can be used to arrest the volume change mechanisms that are going on. And that's the real problem. We cannot get past the unfortunate reality that when we're combining water plus cement, you get a gel, if you will, or a soup. When that soup hardens, it's using water to hydrate the cement, so you're going to get some outgassing or some change in our phases, and that ultimately leads to a volume change. And we can't get past some volume change. Now we can use that stuff to expand the concrete to some small degree. We can use that stuff to retard the hydration process and change the effects of the impact of the evaporation with water. We can coat it, we can cover it, we can flood it, but that being said, you're always going to have that volume change. And if you're looking at a slab, where most people see these cracks happen, or bridges, but more so slabs, there's a restraint on the bottom of the slab. So when we do shrinkage tests here in the lab, we actually never see cracking when we do a shrinkage test because there is no restraint. That sample is allowed to move without, having to overcome a certain amount of resisting energy. When we put concrete on a subbase or a subgrade with, in a certain environment where we restrict its movement, that's where energy builds up and the concrete releases that energy through cracking. So getting past that sometimes requires all the chemicals that I talked about, plus playing with the water cementitious, playing with the type of aggregate, the amount of aggregate, as well as creating a different environment, whether it's putting visqueen underneath or plastic underneath your slab to reduce that restraint, or flooding it, or putting an evaporation retarder, or finishing it, or whatever it is. It's really controlling not just the chemistry of the concrete, but the entire process. And on a residential job site, especially a driveway, it's kind of tough to do, and contractors don't really do that. But big jobs, warehouse floors that need super flat floors or flat floors, they definitely do that. It has been done. And yes, we have been able to reduce cracking significantly, but totally stop cracking, that's something a bit more difficult to do and almost unrealistic, basically because we can't get over that volume change. Now, getting pretty darn close, we can totally do that. So the next question we got was actually from our social media expert that works with us. And her question is, what is the process behind ASTMC 666, the freeze-thaw chamber? And it's actually a pretty easy process. We put the concrete in a submerged environment where we freeze it and then thaw it over a certain period of time. Now, each individual freeze-thaw cycle, we go, I believe, 4 to 6 per day. I can't really remember which ones. Whitney and David are the ones who take care of it. But ultimately, we've got some probes in a concrete sample, and again, we're trying to freeze the center of the concrete and then thaw it out. And we do that for 300 cycles, which I believe turns out to be 50 or 60 days. And then from there, what we're doing is every, I believe it's 20 cycles, please don't quote me on that, we're getting the dynamic modulus. So what we're doing is we're putting a sensor on it, the same sensor that's used, I believe, in EKGs, and we're taking a ball peen hammer and whoosh, whacking it and measuring the frequency or the frequency and amplitude of the wave from that hammer smack, that ball peen hammer smack, as it goes from one end of the concrete sample back to the other or original end. And as we start going through the deterioration process from the freezing and thawing cycles, we're going to start developing some cracks in the concrete, and that wave won't be able to travel as far and end up bouncing back sooner. And we'll see that through our relative modulus as we go through the cycles, and we compare it to our reference to an experimental to see how our additives and admixtures are helping reduce the durability of those cracks forming, which of course will have an impact on that relative modulus or that wave that goes back and forth. So yeah, I think that's the end for Q&A day. Thank you for your time. You've got questions, we've got answers. Hope you have an awesome day. Go concrete, beat asphalt.